is now in session. Please be seated.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, counsel.
Morning.
Good
Morning, Your Honor.
Mr. Lawyer. Returning, if we may, to the issue of the videotape. I've had the opportunity, I guess I've lost my clerk here. I've had the opportunity to view the disc that was presented. As I understand it, it's edited from the original GoPro to eliminate dead time or dead air, so to speak.
Yeah, there's an extensive period of dead air. I should say dead air, it's black. I mean,
Yeah.
it's on, but it's just
Yep,
black.
Yep,
And there's no audio, as I said, so there's...
no audio.
Right.
What I did watch was approximately 53 minutes, which I think is what was represented. So if we haven't marked this as an exhibit, we've marked the GoPro and what has been transferred onto a hard drive from the GoPro. And that's number what, please?
125A is the GoPro camera and 125B is the flash drive.
Okay. And I assume this is a derivative of that flash drive.
Yes.
So I'm going to have this marked 125C.
So, Mark.
Now, the question comes as to whether to show it to the jury. By entering it as an exhibit, I've obviously concluded that it has evidentiary worth. It is relevant, it is probative, and its prejudicial value does not outrun the probative nature of it. It's an exhibit. What you want to do, Mr. Glennie, as I understand it, is now show it to the jury.
That is correct, Your Honor.
My concern isn't any of the evidentiary basic findings. My concern is a simple one. I had a very hard time viewing it in my lobby where I was able to get literally a foot to a foot and a half away from the screen. I don't see where it's going to be useful in the courtroom for the jury. I can see where it's useful for them to have a device in the jury room to watch it if they wish, but I just don't see how putting it up on the screen for an hour is going to help anybody.
If I might address that.
Please.
I think the problem lies in that, much as the SJC has concluded that these types of evidence, which are unbiased,
Yeah.
you can't really put a spin on it. It is what it is.
Yep.
Right? If the jury, let's just say they decide 4 people want to watch it, and the remainder don't, that's not going to get watched.
How do I know? How do you?
Exactly. How do we know?
The jury deliberation is strictly to the jurors.
Well, I think we're putting our thumb on that by not allowing them to see what the Commonwealth wishes to present in its case in chief, which is an unbiased, there's no,
It has evidentiary worth. We're past that.
right.
It isn't, is it worth evidence? It is. The question is it worth viewing in the courtroom?
There are portions of that, Your Honor, that I would suggest are very important to the case, that put to rest inconsistencies in statements that were made. There's a suggestion by Mr. Loya in the statements he made to the police, and as we're going to find in statements he made to Dr. Danow, that there was a knife involved, and that he changed his mind about using the knife. And as he's walking out the room, because he's going to end the whole thing, he changes his mind back and he uses the gun. On that video, there is no evidence of a knife being used by Mr. Loya.
But
There
the
is a-
video is of such poor quality, Mr. Glennie, that one doesn't know if the knife was or wasn't used. It doesn't conclusively tell us the knife was not used.
I'm not
All it
s-
tells us is it does not show on the GoPro.
It certainly aids, I would suggest, in the jury's determination of the credibility of the statement made by Mr. Loya. You can see on that video, I would suggest, a portion where there's a gun in the hand, there's a portion when there's a rifle in the hand. Never
It
is.
is very clear.
Yes.
The gun is
And that's,
perhaps clear upon repeated view.
that's, I would respectfully disagree with that.
It's in the eye of the beholder,
Because, no, I think you can clearly see the gun at one point.
if you know what you're looking for.
That could be, I think it's obvious that it's not a knife that's in his hand, I would suggest. In any event,
I can agree with you there.
this goes beyond just what happened in the room, which it goes to when he gets to the location, how he retrieves the deer cam, how he views it in his car, how he then goes to the painstaking attempts to set up a situation, which goes to the hoax device, which goes to a number of the other charges of putting the car where he does, burning the car, placing devices, using the shotgun to enter into the house to begin with, going up the stairs, what he does after he's done in the house, how he leaves, when the mattress is used by the two victims, I would suggest, when he's going around that whole area, the shooting of the police officer. Now, again, it doesn't show him shooting, but it shows where he was when the shooting took place, I would argue, and then how he, in the end, gives up, so to speak. That's all contained, I would suggest, in the video, where you can't question about where was this person able to view? How were they able to see this? You know, it also...
I have no problem with anything you're saying. What I'm telling you is, for jurors seated in that jury box to see it on that screen in this courtroom, it's going to be very, very difficult and of little worth. That's what I'm telling you.
I would disagree with that in as much as if they watch it once here, that may spur them to take a closer look at it in the jury deliberation room.
Got a case that tells me I should put it up on that screen?
I don't believe there is a case that has to do with putting it up on a screen. I think there are cases, though, that do suggest that this is the type of evidence that is very important.
I've already crossed that bridge.
Okay.
It's in.
Well, I mean, for the
bridge is
jury to
crossed.
see.
Give me the case that tells me it should be up on the screen in the courtroom.
Well, I would suggest, Your Honor, is that the judges act as gatekeepers with the evidence that come into the court. Now, you've already decided that it's relevant evidence. We want, the Commonwealth in this case in chief wants to show that to the jury. And I would respectfully suggest, Your Honor, that this would really be undercutting the Commonwealth's ability to present the case in which we believe is the best case to be put forward to the jury.
Okay. You cited a few minutes ago in the lobby Commonwealth versus Price.
Yes.
Is there anything in Price that touches on our issue? Not the evidentiary
Yeah.
worth of it, our issue.
Again,
Should
after...
something that is of marginal value when viewed from a distance in the courtroom, something a judge has to show to the jury on
Well,
a video?
Again, I would respectfully disagree.
Yeah, we've crossed that bridge too, Mr. Klein. Now.
No, I mean
Got
about
a case?
the marginally...
Got a case.
Well, the only case I would suggest after an exhaustive search, there were no cases in Massachusetts. Either way,
Okay. Classically, the judge is the gatekeeper of the evidence. I don't see putting it up on a screen in this courtroom with the jury in the box is going to help the jury. Quite frankly, to the contrary, it's going to leave the jury puzzled and bored over an hour. I don't see the worth of it. There are fleeting moments where that tape is riveting, and it is best viewed close at hand. And certainly, you can tell the jurors that in your closing. It's an exhibit, it's in, and they may view it, and they will have the opportunity to view it, if they wish. I'm not going to have them run through it for an hour in the courtroom. Now, the Pennsylvania roadside video, as I understand it, you take an interlocutory if you want, run it up. The Pennsylvania roadside video, both counsel want, and it cues directly into at least one of the doctors, if not a couple, is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you say it?
The Pennsylvania roadside video.
Right,
You both want,
yes.
all right? We've already done the deer cam.
Yes.
The daytime drive-by,
Yeah, and just that we did the October deer cam, yes.
yes. The daytime drive-by. 15 minutes going around the rotary, going around the circle of Roundtree?
No, actually, he stops, inside the complex near where they're thinking you can actually see, not that it's been identified, but you can see Anna's car when he pulls in.
Okay. There's no need to show that in the courtroom.
Right. It was 15 minutes.
There's no need to show that one in the courtroom.
So would that be marked for an exhibit as well?
I'm sorry?
Would that be marked as an exhibit?
Yes, now, is it already part of is it part of 125B?
125?
No, that's the GoPro.
Correct.
Do we have it separately as an exhibit already?
I don't believe we do. Well, let me say this. It's on the thumb drive with everything else we've been discussing. So we took
The thumb drives that are recovered around his neck and in the motel?
right, the one that's found around his neck, and then the ones that were found in the motel as well. But that thumb drive contains almost, not the GoPro, obviously, that comes from the GoPro, but everything else we've been discussing is on the thumb drive.
Including the manifesto.
Including the manifesto, including the girl bits, including,
If you want to submit a disk that isolates,
right,
we can certainly make it a sub-exhibit.
right, that's what we did, and that's what I would, this is it right here.
Okay.
So this is off the group of flash drives, right?
All right. Counsel, I want you to come around and take a minute with Mr. Colgan and make sure we've got this down right, as far as which exhibits and which subs.
We've got the
Go
group
to
of
what?
flash
No, no,
drives,
I'm already.
You don't care.
No, I'm totally
which is
confused.
123.
So-
Well, that's why I want you over here to discuss this with my
Is this
clerk,
from
please.
that, or is it from the
The
purple?
one, the purple with the purple screen.
Okay, so that, I think, is,
do you have that?
we've already got a DVD off of that, right, of something else?
Yes, that was shown the deer cam.
Okay, so then we'll make it 126C. So marked 126C.
Let me make a suggestion. Can the GoPro be better edited? There's an awful lot of running with this bouncing lights. There's a lot of walking around the complex that is of minimal value. Can it be better edited?
I would have to defer, obviously, to Mr. Barris, but
It seems to me, from watching the GoPro, the critical portions are the placement of the items, for example, the large boombox, the immediate approach. The setting of fire of the car is minimally displayed, quite frankly, and hard to distinguish versus some of the other lights in the background. That doesn't seem to be a great... The setting of the items, the immediate approach, going up the stairs, in the room. Now, there's a lot of time in the room where we're focusing on the ceiling. Whether that can or shouldn't be edited is debatable. There may be value in the passage of time in that room. Clearly, what is shown of the mattress and the figures. Beyond that, the shooting of McDonald, it really doesn't come across very clearly on that video at all. Now, the surrender clearly does. If you can edit it down to what I just suggested, for purposes of showing it in the room here, that I'd consider.
I don't know how much, I would suggest that we could probably do that, just so that I'm clear. We would just start with retrieval of the deer cam, looking at, viewing that in the car,
Yeah,
then skipping
Yeah.
to putting the devices down,
Yeah.
skipping to, then he goes back to the car, skipping to.
Yeah, we don't need to go back. to
Right,
that.
skipping that, and then going to entering the house.
Going up the stairs.
Yeah, and then the incidents that happens, because I would suggest the amount of time that he spent in the room would be somewhat important. And as he walks, there's one port, you can just see him, he just walks, then you can see he's outside, ending it where he goes outside, and then just doing the, when he's surrendering.
Yep.
Now, with the understanding that if they wanted to watch the entire thing, they could.
Telling them that.
Right, I mean, like,
This
they
isn't
have the
edited.
entire video with them.
This is edited.
Right,
For the limited purpose of your seeing it in the courtroom.
right.
I'll instruct them.
Can we do that?
What do you say, Mr. Segadelli?
And how long would that take?
Well, I agree with the court that it's, having watched it numerous times, it's difficult to make out.
Very difficult.
The Commonwealth gives a narrative, their narrative, after having watched it as many times as they have. So I agree with the court that it's hard to decipher, besides watching the bouncing lights drive you crazy. That having been said, I just wonder what's the court's intention is to send all of it in as a whole.
Yep.
And then, as you just said, we're only playing a bit of it for you, because that's the only evidentiary value that we found.
No, there is a limited presentation in the courtroom to acquaint you with the exhibit. The exhibit in its entirety is yours to view in the jury room as often or as little as you wish. We are acquainting you with some of the substance of that exhibit.
With the edited version, would that be marked for ID? And then if they want to watch it, or would it go in with it as well?
It could go in as a sub, it could go in perhaps as a chalk explaining the exhibit, I don't know.
I would ask Mr. Barris to begin that process, then we would show the court obviously before anything.
I mean, we're talking, you're gonna take the 53 minutes down, I would think, to 10 or less.
Yeah, I don't know about 10 or less, but I would certainly say be
Well, there's an
much
awful
less
lot
than
of room.
53.
There's an awful lot of time in that.
I agree.
At looking at the ceiling. Awful lot, Mr. Lenny.
I know, but I'm just suggesting that the time that he was in the room can be very, very important.
Get it to 15 minutes.
So that's what we'll do. It's in
15 minutes or less.
with the end, right, because we have the doctors that can come in, we could always show it after, before we arrest, that would be fine.
All right.
And I think
And
it
it
was,
will be presented to them as just what I said.
well, right, and we'll let the court see it, obviously, before we
Yeah,
do.
I'd do that.
Yeah,
I don't want to put them to sleep. And for an hour, they're going to lose interest. They've been very, very attentive. But repeat videos of looking at the ceiling and bouncing lights isn't going to help them one bit. Let's get down to what will help them. You've already edited it down more. We ready for the jurors?
was there another video? We did the.
Well,
deer
you're the
cam-
fellow putting them in.
I know, just to make sure we went through them all. There was a video of him placing the deer cam. How long was it?
There's the drive-through at Roundhouse.
The ride around Roundhouse
No
Road.
confirmation.
They can just see that in the jury room if
Right,
they
well, the
wish.
visual confirmation, what do you, we already showed that, didn't we?
The October deer cam we've
October,
already
right.
had up on the screen.
Right. I know there's one other one of him placing the deer cam, that would have been the day before, when he went out there. But it's got this, you know how long it is? He's gonna check on how long that is, but I think
Oh, it's today.
the only reason that would be, it would be just him putting the deer cam around the tree. But I mean, I want to introduce that whether we,
Well,
6 minutes. We can provide that to the court if it wish, at recess to.
let's bring the jurors down. Let's get that Pennsylvania video going.
And we do have transcripts, Your Honor, of that, if you'd like me to hand to the court officers to hand out.
Please.
Let me just go get those.
Now, there was a request as well that Trebnikova be allowed to sit in the courtroom.
Yes. But she just wanted to know if the sequestration is still a part of it. I don't,
Let me see counsel.
I don't know if she was.
Let me see counsel. All right, let's bring down the jury.
Jurors entering, all rise, please.
Yeah, do you have anti-Y?
Court is now in session. Please be seated, folks.
As an addendum to our discussion, I'm sorry, counsel, let me add this. Commonwealth versus Aleyne, Alleyne, 474 Mass. 771 at 780, and Commonwealth versus Amran, Amran, 471 Mass. 354 and 358 are pertinent on the issue and affirm the judge's discretion as I read them. Good morning, jurors. Are there any among you who have anything to report to the court by way of your having been exposed to information about this case or gained information about this case after we parted company yesterday? The jurors have no report. Counsel, is it your intention now to play that so-called Pennsylvania
Yes, Your Honor.
roadside video?
Yes.
All right.
And I have transcripts if they could be handed out to
All
me.
right, jurors have transcripts of that video as well, and obviously the same instruction applies. They are to assist you in viewing the video. They're not a substitute in any way for the video. Chalk, identification, next letter. Have you been marking them as chalks?
Last one was a charge.
Well, I think we already submitted one the other day, perhaps when you weren't here, of an earlier one. If you want to renumber it as a chalk, that's fine. Call it a chalk, but be consistent. If we have a transcript in the pile that's already for identification, then it's an ID. Whatever, be consistent, whatever it is. All right? Terrific. Thank you.
You know, Trooper Donovan had been testifying. I think he's already indicated what this is. If we could just play it, or we could bring him back in. whatever.
Please.
Okay.
Any objection to that, Mr.
No
Singer?
objection.
All right. Let me see counsel at sidebar, too.
Boulders. Second road. Panic attack. I'm driving back home from the first operation. I've just been thinking of what else I'm going to write for the paper. Still everything that's gone on. Between me and stuff going on. I started hyperventilating. Couldn't breathe. My body's been clenching up and heavily tingling or something. My hands are open. I can barely hold the phone. Pulled over. Just someone caused an accident or something. Calm down. I'm recording. In case anything ever happens. People know. And I can include it in the operation. I got the depth, I can't hold it. feel paralyzed. I can't move. God, I can't move. My hand, my right hand, it's locked. I want to turn on the car so I can open up the windows. Fuck. Oh my God. Oh, thank goodness it's just push buttons. Alright, I'll turn the car back off again. I don't. Oh God, I don't like this. Oh. Alright. Get in my hat. Put my hat on. Alright, I'm gonna see where the law of traffic, so I get out, see outside. This is probably maybe third time it's happened to me before. Second time it's happened to me in a car. God, it's a lot of fucking cars. Oh, God. It's 10:47 Eastern Standard Time. I'm in Pennsylvania. Alright. So there's a oh God, yeah. All the operational stuff doesn't get lost. It's always on me just in case. It's popping little spikes. Purple patch on there. Maybe simple. A couple months ago. Star Wars. Boy, love Star Wars. Sitting on here on Verm, I think it's called. I've got some pretty hit from people. That's my speed. I don't think we'll see. And if they hit my car, I should be pretty safe to have range less than a degree and the smack in the face. I don't know if you can hear it or not. It's coming pretty loud. I know this Moto Wax has pretty good microphones. It starts hurting me while I'm thinking about it. I'm just gonna try to talk about nonsense or something. I just want to sit a bit calm. I just want to describe what happened. I was going over the stuff in my head. For next time to write it out when I get the chance. It's the long story. The long detail. I like I keep it in the story. I put some lighthearted stuff into it. I'm going to try to walk away, I guess it's not loud. A lot of pretty busy around here. Really fit. So here's here's a deer fence. So I can feel that there. I'm gonna jump the fence, walk around it there as I'm talking. I don't do this either. this fucking selfish shit or ever record myself. But this is gonna be good for the records. Fuck. I don't really have the strength right now to jump over this little fence, so hold on. Fuck. Watch my pocket. Oh my god, I can't feel stuck. Here's a deer trail. It's really great. I have my hazard lights on the car. Trying to pull over to offer assistance with it. You know, they didn't think do so. My walls in the butt, too. There's a lot of butt there. Walking around out here. But they're going very quickly yet. I think I'm just barely over a hill. So people shouldn't have time to see it, but it's kind of stuff what we think. Cows. Yes, it's like a gate So I was, in my head thinking, some follow-up. Right now, the story, I'm in the, girls I've known from my life. And, I think at the very, right, just ended where the girl who I dated in high school, I don't remember her name or face, it's more Memorandum. I was driving, I'm thinking about the next topics to write about. The big points here and there, what should be coming up. And I started thinking about June of this year when I decided to construction drops towels or something. It sounds like something. Oh shit, listen to this. Yeah, is it like thunder or campfire? Fucking T-Rexes about to come out. T-Rex, I'm thinking T-Rex. Alright, so I was thinking about, it's past June, when I started thinking about it. I was, it's just incredibly crazy what I was planning to do. It's fucking crazy that I want to conduct a mission to go murder a girl. And then die. It's not exactly the healthiest thoughts. Alright. So I was thinking about it in June. I came to my decision that I was going to do it. Start planning it now. But I started thinking about it. realized, was like, hey, you know what? I'm here to start my career. I have suicidal thoughts, I have murderous thoughts. You know what? We'll make this get some help. There goes the computer. So, because I started doing the airsoft thing, as training for when the day comes, to understand what it's like to, really, video game that get targets, really interested in carrying them. But, it's fun. It's, most people, it is fun to play soldier. I think being an actual soldier would suck ass, it's probably called horrible, but playing soldier on the weekends, weekend warrior stuff, it's fun. And because of the, all that shit. But, it was very fun. Since I decided to end my career, pretty much everything, work wasn't so bad anymore. It was nothing bad. I just did what I wanted. I just had to come to work. I just had to, I go to work, got to do anything, no one cares, because, hey, this guy's, leaving. And, it's how I want my, regular life to be, to, just enjoy going to work, not having to worry about performance reviews, my careers, and stuff. So that was going good. The weekend work was fun. I finally got back into a video game, and all that. And then, so that's when I started coming in. It's like, you know what? We're still early in this whole thing. So what if I say we, I don't really have multiple personalities, but it's only myself, my own people in my life. So there's a person, and then there's, my mind. But anyways, I'm feeling better now. So yeah, I decided, it's early on to stop it. So I went, I thought, but I still have, I still have problems though. And how should I need help. How should I go about, getting help? And because of my scars and knowing how this stuff works, I didn't want to go look for help, which would also, basically put me in danger because now, hey, this guy has issues, let's get him out of the military, and then I'm out, basically dead anyways. So I called, what's it called? The CG support guy line, got a little lady, just wanted to know what problem was. So I just felt like, 99% sure that I have a personality disorder. It's not a bad one. I don't think it's, from what people know of it, it's generally not exactly, it's not a bad one to have. Schizoid personality disorder. I'm pretty sure I have it. How do I go about, getting, therapy or something about it? But also, if I go to, Coast Guard Medical or anything, will it set off, alarms and events that's going to cause them to, discharge me from the Coast Guard because of having a disorder? They, she said like she doesn't, she wasn't aware about it or doesn't know anything about it. So, and she doesn't know what the procedures are for, getting rid of people. It's really pretty here. so, so she said, there should be no harm in me going to medical and, tell them to see what they can do for me. And so I said, thank you, and goodbye. But, I knew that it's not going to happen. It's not going to work out if I go tell them. Since I've been telling people things that are wrong, asking for help, nothing but bad things have happened. So, you probably understand why I'm scared and hesitant to come to us for help. So then I went online, started reading about, trying to find out other military members out there who been diagnosed with schizoid and what happens to them. There's not much. Again, the whole schizoid thing is the main thing is people are a little say to themselves and they're quiet, so you don't really hear about them much, or from them. And if there was a couple stories on forums, there's at least one Army guy. He was schizoid. He was having issues at work, and then he actually got diagnosed with it, and he was immediately discharged from the Army. Another one, I think, the Navy and the Air Force, all the primary services, and they all ended with them being discharged. So that's when I was like, well, maybe if I do change my mind or something, this past summer, I'll be like, let's still keep our down low. If we're not going to go through with the main thing, then don't start causing trouble for yourself if you try to survive. And that was what I was thinking about right now as I was driving. Still recording. I started thinking like how, because back in jail I was thinking about again stuff I like, what I still want to do, and again there's not much, but the main one was I love Star Wars. I want to see them do Star Wars. And thought I'm not going to be here anymore. And I'll never see it. Here's what's good. So start kicking off triggers. I'm walking back in the car. See if I can check, see what's still yeah, that's starting happening. I'm still thinking about it. God. That's what I haven't eaten today. I've just been drinking an energy drink. I think it's a Monster Recovery, the pink lemonade one. I don't want to really go through this right now. But it was. I've had a couple attacks with this. I never had before in my life until now. But it's only been 3 bad ones. And now it's the very, very first one where I was in the bathroom. And another one was when, after I had the talk with Mr. Ryan, I was crying in there, and then we finally let me go. I went back to the Frisco's. I was still all messed up, crying. And I realized I had to get out of there, so I got my running gear, put my running gear on, and I started driving out to Abercrombie. And then, as I left the base, got onto Reznov, I started crying again really hard. Because that really horrible style of crying. Whereas before in Mr. Ryan's office, when I was crying, it was, sad crying or whatever. In the car, it's the PTSD crying type. Where I can't breathe, but I start hyperventilating. Chest is really tightened up. And, tears aren't pouring out, but, I'm gritting my teeth, trying to, I'm breathing through my mouth and gritting my teeth. And it was, that started happening. And as I was starting to enter town, looking for that, right before 10 minutes curve, my left side, my left arm, started really tingling badly. And that's never happened before. Started tingling, and it was weird sensation. It started like numb. So then, as I started driving to town, going towards the hospital. As you enter town, you take a right and start going to the hilly part of the road that goes through town. And, I was messed up. I was like, I started laughing a bit because I was like, oh no, I'm having a heart attack. I don't want to never had a heart attack. My rib died. So, your left side starts going numb or something. So it's like, well, this is it. This is how Adrian Loya goes down for all these events. And it's because he had a heart attack after just crying because some old man was talking shit to him, basically. And ran away crying. And now he's having a heart attack on the road. It's probably gonna happen and he's gonna crash. And, So then I started subsiding. Since I was laughing, coming at ease a bit. So I got to Abercrombie, immediately started going for a jog, started, cooled down. Then got to one little lookout spot, and then I just stopped and I sat there. I teared up and cried a little bit more, but it wasn't bad. Then after several, maybe half an hour or so, started going back to jogging back to the car. When I got there, Frisco's are there, Harvey's there, and they wanted to know what happened. I did text. I texted them, texted Mr. Egan, texted the one-on-one, what's it called? She's like a side person after you have a sexual assault case or whatever to check in on you. So Saturday night I was having the arm tinglings and something was wrong. I just been yelled at by Mr. Ryan and it's feeling horrible. So first I knew something was wrong. They saw me when I came to the house that I was speaking and was kind of distraught. And came by, petted Harvey, told him thanks for coming, told him what happened, but I was kind of calm down. It was all right. Went back up home to the Frisco's and kind of fine. And since then, I haven't had anything remotely similar. We've been crying and stuff like that, throughout the years, but sorry, it stopped. What I was talking about is like, I haven't had any kind of panic attack since that time with Mr. Ryan, and it's been over a year, and this is the first one again, but it was bad. my whole body was tingling, a weird tingling sensation. And I realized what was happening, I couldn't really move, it was tingling badly in what's it called? When I realized I was getting into an accident, so I wasn't able to totally control the car anymore. So slow down, pull off the side of the road, turn on the hazards, and then that's when I started the video because I knew this was big and people need to know about it. I guess also for my record, so I just see what happens. How it looked, what happened. But yeah, I remember my left arm. My left arm was tingling in the side of breast, back in Kodiak, and it was, it was there, and it was tingling half the side. It wasn't moving, but that was my side. This time it was the entire body, and as you saw, as I tried to show in the video, don't remember now if I told the captain or not. When my hand was paralyzed, there was weird little fucking cerebral palsy kind of clamp. This helped out a lot. Walk out. It's really pretty out here. Fucking gorgeous out here. Alright, I'm gonna start heading to the car. So yeah, this is for myself. This is for the investigators. It's for historical records. So we can see what happens. Hopefully, they'll offer help for others. Hopefully not like me. I never get myself like me. So just know, no more secrets like this. Thank you for listening.
You have a rock for this?
Okay.
Great. Now, is this a subpart of the thumb drive around the neck?
Yes.
So it'll be 125 subletter, whatever is
Yes.
next, Mr. Clerk.
So that'd be 125. D. D.
This is the flash, the purple flash.
Well, there's a purple flash. Mr. Glenny, we need your attention, and Mr. Segadoli.
126.
The purple flash drive is 126.
Yes.
The thumb drive around the neck is
125.
125. So it's a sub of 125.
No, it's a sub of 126 because 125 is the GoPro.
Right.
126 is the USB.
When you said the 126 would have the purple, like it was around his neck with the purple string. That's what this came from.
Okay.
Yes.
125 is the GoPro.
Yes.
Reduced to a thumb drive.
Yes. Well, it's actually the memory stick from the GoPro that's the B.
Whatever a GoPro does.
But I'm saying it's not on the thumb drive. It was,
Okay, it is part of the GoPro.
Yes.
Okay, and that's B, 125B.
Yes.
So this is a sub of 126.
Yes.
Okay.
126D.
Jurors, forgive me for my technical ignorance, but I am of an earlier age. What can I say?
Trooper Donovan.
And let me see counsel. You will have that stick, or whatever the right word is, from the GoPro to watch to your heart's content in the jury room as an exhibit if you wish. We're making an effort to prepare an edited version of that to show you in the courtroom, to introduce you to what's on the GoPro. But we'll see if we can get that editing done and present that in a little bit. But you will have the entirety of the GoPro as it's rendered to that stick in the jury room as an exhibit. Trooper, you recall you were under oath yesterday?
Yes, Your Honor.
That oath remains in effect today, sir.
125C is the disc that's made off the stick from the GoPro.
I see 121.
Madam Clerk?
Please.
Thank you. Now, you had indicated that you had a chance to see what was on the thumb drive that had been around. Mr. Laisner, correct?
Correct.
And I asked you to be kind enough to look at Exhibit 121. Was there a copy of that on that disk or
There-
thumb drive?
There was.
And the one that was on the thumb drive, did it also contain this page and this page?
It did.
Yeah, 121 is the email that Anna testified she'd received from Mr. Loya. I'm going to ask, not that we reintroduce the entire letter, but we just put on the cover that was on the thumb drive and just make it 121B.
I
Or
agree.
A.
Now, just for the sake of clarity, that's not alleged to have been received by Anna?
No, this was not. This was, yes. The Exhibit 121 was.
Was.
What I'm offering was not.
Was not, but it was on the thumb drive?
Yes.
All right.
But I thought if we did the letter, it would show that it was attached to that instead of my having, unless you want me to introduce the entire letter again.
No, well, I can do the addendum.
On 21B.
You're calling it 121B. The original one was just 121.
Yeah, we'll make the original letter 121A and the addendum 121B.
Thank you.
That's, this American.
I do.
And what is that, please?
These are emails between Adrian Loya and Lisa Trubnikova.
And was that on the thumb drive?
It was.
I'd offer this one.
No objection.
Next number exhibit.
132.
Can I see Exhibit 74? If you'd be kind enough to look at these, tell me if you recognize what these are.
I do.
What were they?
These were in a folder under equipment, and it's training gear
Okay, you can say under a folder. Where was that folder?
on the USB.
And if you kind of look at this, you recognize what this is.
Sorry. I'm going so fast.
Do you recognize those?
I do.
And what were those?
These also run in the folder equipment on the USB.
You know, I'd offer these.
No objection.
I would suggest A and B. They need to be stapled together.
Oh, okay. Sure, I'll take your suggestion.
Thank you.
Next number exhibit, A and B.
Oh, thank you.
133. You said
A and B. They're grouped. A, B. You can run a staple through each if you wish.
So if you kind of look at this, recognize what that is.
I do.
And what is that, please?
This is a letter from the Coast Guard memorandum to Adrian Loya, indicating to him that the allegations are
Object.
It's a letter from the Coast Guard to Mr. Lawyer.
correct.
And where was that found?
This was found on the USB as well.
And would you look at exhibit number 74, do you recognize that?
I do.
What was that?
This is the page 7.
Was that also on the USB as well?
It was.
Yeah, no, I'd offer this to go along with this. This was found, obviously, at a different location, but the copy that was on along with this item as well.
The new item is a brand-new exhibit number. I assume no objection.
No, I believe they're in with the previous
This one's
USB.
There appears to be some sort of a cover letter or something.
I got you, yeah.
All right.
Okay, 133. One 34.
Your Honor, with the exception of the potential edited version of the GoPro, I have nothing further for this witness.
Cross-examination if you wish.
Nothing, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may step aside.
Thank you, Your Honor.
If I could just check for seeing if somebody's here, be the next witness.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
So raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear testimony you give to the court and the jury and the issues now pending between the Commonwealth defendants bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Sir, in a nice, loud voice, could you state your name and could you spell your last name?
My name is Dr. Martin Kelly, Kelly.
And where do you currently reside?
I reside in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, and also have a home in Westport, Massachusetts.
And would you be kind enough, sir, just to go over some of your educational background?
Yes, I received my pre-med education at Boston College, and after college, I went to Tufts University School of Medicine. I received my MD degree from Tufts.
Could you speak up just a little bit louder? Thank you.
I received my MD degree from Tufts University School of Medicine. Following that, I had an internship at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Boston, and then began psychiatric training. I received my psychiatric training at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center in Boston. And during those years, I was also a teaching fellow in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. That completed my formal education.
And have you had any publications or anything of that nature? Could you tell the jurors about that, please?
Most of my publications have been in the area of the interface between psychiatry and medicine. So I've written chapters, co-authored chapters in a textbook of medicine called Harrison. I've co-authored several articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, again having to do with psychiatric issues, who's at risk of committing suicide in a medical hospital, who wants to read their records, and what happens to them. What happens to people who are discharged against medical advice, 3 separate articles. I've also written some chapters in books, one having to do with suicide in a book on depression and suicide, the evaluation of suicide in a medical emergency room. I've written a chapter, co-authored a chapter in a textbook of anesthesia textbook to help anesthesiologists How do you deal with patients who might be on certain psychiatric medications? Do you continue to them? Do you stop them, restart them? And also some about the interpersonal aspects of things. So that's a summary of some of the publications.
What is your present occupation, sir?
I'm a psychiatrist. I'm on the staff of the Brigham and Women's Hospital. I have a small private practice of psychiatry in which I see patients. And I also do consultations for matters that might be in litigation, such as criminal matters, but also civil suits that might involve head injury, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, things of that sort.
And sir, you testified before.
I also teach. The fall semester is starting, so next week I begin a class that I've taught for a while.
And where is that class?
It's in the Harvard Longwood Residency in Psychiatry. The Harvard Longwood Residency in Psychiatry is a combination of the Brigham and Women's Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and the Massachusetts Mental Health Center, and it's a combined residency.
And have you testified before in the courts of Commonwealth?
Yes, I have.
And just could you tell us what courts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Most of them. I've testified in this court several times. I've testified in Suffolk County, Middlesex County, Norfolk County, Berkshire County, Hampshire County, most of the counties in Massachusetts. I've also testified in federal courts, both in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and other states.
And who's retained you during those times that you've testified?
Both defendants and prosecutors, and occasionally a judge might ask in aid of sentencing or to evaluate the competency of a witness. But for the most part, it's prosecutors or defense attorneys or plaintiff's attorney if it's a civil suit.
And were you retained to conduct an examination in this matter?
Yes, I was.
And who were you retained by, please?
By your office, by you.
And did you in fact conduct an examination with respect to this matter?
Yes, I did.
And who was the person that you conducted the examination of?
Adrian Loya.
And do you see him in court here today?
Yes, I do.
And could you just kindly point him out, tell us where he's sitting?
Sitting over there with a shirt and necktie. It looks like it's a purple shirt or light colored shirt.
May the record reflect he's identified the defendant, Your Honor.
So noted.
Thank you. And could you tell us, before you, did you interview the defendant sometime?
Yes, I did.
Before you did that, did you avail yourself of some other items in which to familiarize yourself with the case?
Yes, I did.
Could you kindly tell the jurors what items is it that you did look at, had available to you?
Yeah. I reviewed police reports, extensive police reports. I reviewed extensive Coast Guard reports. I reviewed writings of Mr. Loya. I reviewed videotapes that he had made. I reviewed tapes of the incident. I reviewed tapes of the interviews with the police immediately after. I reviewed reports at that point of Dr. Daigneault. I reviewed Bridgewater State Hospital records. I'm probably forgetting something, but there was more material in this case than I think I've ever had.
Did you indicate you had reviewed some videos?
Yes,
Do you know where those videos had come from?
yes.
Could you tell the jurors, where did they come from?
Well, directly from you.
No, but I mean, like, did they come from a certain specific device? That's what I...
Some of them were from GoPro cameras, and some were from a video he made on his phone. And those kinds of devices are the ones that I remember most.
Was there a trail camera as well?
Trail camera, GoPro, they're sort of the same to me.
Okay, fair enough. Well, could you describe, when you say the GoPro camera?
Just a minute, Mr. Glennie. Doctor, you keep leaning on that board there, and quite frankly, I don't think it's that sturdy. Would you prefer a seat?
I'll be okay. I'll try
You'll
to.
be okay. Okay, well, it's a wonderful antique. I don't want you to,
Oh, yeah.
break it on me.
Will I have to pay for it?
It's priceless, sir, it's priceless. All right.
Okay. And did you also have an opportunity to review an item that was prepared by Eli Horrigan from the Barnstable County Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
Okay. Now, after having made the review of those items, what's the next thing you did with respect to this case?
I had some conversations with you in your office, and some of the police reports may have come in after, not at the beginning. But I then went to interview Mr. Loya.
Oh, and you did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Lawyer?
Yes.
Do you know how many times and how long those interviews were?
I saw him on 3 occasions, and each of the occasions was probably 2.5 to 3 hours.
And did you form an opinion, sir, as to the criminal responsibility of Mr. Lawyer?
Yes, I did.
And what did you base that opinion upon?
On all the materials that I reviewed, the history I knew of him, background, and the interviews, the examinations.
What was that opinion, sir?
That in my opinion, that he suffered from a mental disease, and that as a result of that mental disease, he lacked the substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law.
And what was that mental disease?
In my opinion, it was, currently the terminology is the autism spectrum, and more commonly it's known as Asperger's disease, high-functioning Asperger's disease.
And could you describe for us, please, what is Asperger's disease?
Asperger's disease is, or autism, the terms used to be equivalent. Now there is a recognition that autism disease, the autism spectrum, has a spectrum. Namely, there are youngsters that are terribly disabled, essentially mute, unable to communicate, can't socialize, and that the spectrum includes people who can be highly functional. Probably one of the most famous is a Temple Grandin, who is a PhD, but she is brilliant at understanding and arranging humane situations for animals and cattle and feedlots and things of that sort. And she didn't speak until she was 3 years of age, only communicated with grunts. She has a PhD. So the spectrum goes from very disabled youngsters to people who can function pretty well in the world if they're in certain circumscribed kinds of situations that don't require them to pick up on subtle social clues, if you will. They tend to be more quiet. They're not outgoing and engaging in other people. They tend to have solitary pursuits that they are involved with, be it, as in this case, video games and things of that sort. But they tend to be isolated. They can be with people and they can be social to a degree, but they don't pick up on the ordinary social clues that many others will.
And is that something that just happens to somebody, or is it something that would have some history in the developmental history of that person? If you know.
The current consensus, I think, is that it's basically hardwired in the brain. It's not something that you can acquire. It's not something that's episodic. It is something that's part of the hardwiring of the brain, and is very difficult to change. There's current great interest in it, and there's attempts to diagnose it earlier. There's a sense that it was underdiagnosed, maybe overdiagnosed now in youngsters, but there is an attempt to try to intervene in an early part of the person's life such that they might be more functional. But it is basically a disorder that's hard to modify substantially.
What do you mean by hard to modify it? What does that mean?
That because the person is autistic, meaning kind of in themselves, they don't make the same kind of emotional connection, okay? This is kind of the theory that, you learn to do certain behaviors from toilet training to other kinds of things because you want to please your parents, kind of thing. That kind of exchange of, I will do something to please someone else, is something that's hard for people who have this type of disorder. And please understand, I'm talking about a spectrum here. I'm not talking about absolutes.
And with respect to the, and I apologize if you said this, but did you say that it's your opinion that he suffers from Asperger's?
Yeah, I would call it high-functioning Asperger's
Okay.
disorder.
Now, is that something that basically you're born with?
Yes.
All right. And would there be any signs that you'd be looking for when they're younger?
The earliest signs have to do with attachment to primary objects, think parents, that there is a tendency to be less connected. And sometimes there are extraordinary parents who can really reach out and engage youngsters, and they understand intuitively that there's something different, particularly if they have more than one child. Often it kind of comes to notice in early childhood schooling kind of thing, in which their peers, the kids they play with, see them as different, subtly different. And it was, I think, the case here, as in his early life, where there was not much of a real deep emotional bond with either of his parents, and that when he got into the school years, there was a tendency for him to be scapegoated, called names, Lurch, from the Addams Family, if people remember that, or Mute. And he was bullied some, and he struck back at one of the people who were bullying him. But that was, in my opinion, the first most obvious sign that he was different. And he's had a sense that he is different and has tried to understand why he is different.
Could you point to anything in the records that shows that he was diagnosed with this Asperger's syndrome when he was younger?
No,
When he was in the military?
no.
And with respect to being a loner, is that fair to say what you're
Yes.
describing? Is it, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong terms, but is it a bullet point, so to speak?
Huh?
A bullet point of Asperger's to not have friends?
Not to have many friends. You may have someone who, or a couple of people who share your peculiar interests, but is not someone who likes to go to dances and things of that sort, doesn't socialize in the same kind of way, doesn't kind of go out and play with people. They'd rather be home doing whatever isolated thing interests them.
And are you saying that there's a specific thing that they'd be interested in, or could it be many things that they're interested in?
It could be many things, but they would probably have some commonality, okay? So it wouldn't be like an interest in sports. How are the Red Sox doing? Are they cheating? Kind of thing, that sort of thing. It would be something set aside, something different, something you could do in a solitary way, something you don't need to particularly interact with people face to face.
And I think you just used the term peculiar interest. What did you mean by peculiar interest?
well, peculiar interests are other people's interests, but I mean, the specific interest, peculiar to them, if you will. They don't have to be weird or bizarre in that sense of peculiar.
When you say they don't, you mean the interest itself,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
Okay. And could you tell us some of the other items that one might be looking for when making a diagnosis of the Asperger's, high-functioning Asperger's, in an individual? Not necessarily Mr. Loya, but in an individual.
Yeah. Well, they don't deal with ambiguity very well. They like structure. They tend to be more literal. They tend to be more concrete. They tend to be more, again, rigid, kind of moralistic. These are the rules, okay? I've been told these are the rules. They tend to be that kind of thing versus, I know there's these rules, but in this instance, we can waive them because of X, Y, and Z. That's not something that is something they can comfortably do. And again, I'm not talking absolutes here. I'm just talking relative characteristics.
And with respect to understanding the rules, is that something that you're indicating that at some point, someone who suffers from the Asperger's syndrome realizes that people aren't reacting back to him because they're not reacting in the way that would be expected of them? Do you understand what I mean by that?
I don't think so, but give it another go.
All right, let me try it. So, is there some learned behavior involved in the Asperger's syndrome that would cause someone to be able to act in a way that may not be comfortable or normal for them because they think that's what's expected of them?
Yes.
Okay, could you expound on that, please? A lot better than I just did.
In the sense that they know what the rules are, they know what you should do in this circumstance or that circumstance. They know what's expected of them. But in terms of picking up subtle social clues or picking up on again, subtle social clues. Are you angry with me? Are you flirting with me? Are you not interested in me? Do you dislike me? They would tend to pick the more negative kinds of things, but in terms of really subtle interactions between people, that they're not very good at it.
Okay. So, would a person who suffers from the Asperger's syndrome be able to flirt themselves?
Be able to what?
Flirt themselves?
Yes, some can.
And in forming your opinion, did you consider a schizoid personality disorder?
I did.
And tell us what your opinion concerning that is.
The first one to think he was suffering from a schizoid personality disorder was Mr. Loya. He appreciated that he was different in some way, so he went on the internet. And in the internet, you can find categories of types of personality. So he went and found schizoid personality, and he does have some of the characteristics. But schizoid personalities are personality disorders. Now, some people are quieter, timider, like kind of to be by themselves, but they're not a personality disorder. They may have, all of us have certain personality traits, if you will. That's not a disorder. A personality disorder like schizoid is a pervasive wish to not be with people. I don't like being with people. I want to be by myself, and it usually is extreme. Think of someone who's kind of a hermit, living on an island, living in the woods.
I'm sorry, could you just speak up a little bit louder? I'm just having a hard time hearing you here.
Okay, maybe I can.
There you go. I think that's going to help.
That they would want to be in an isolated circumstances by themselves essentially all the time. They really have no particular need for connection with people. And it's extreme, okay? He likes to be by himself some of the time. He likes video games. He's very invested in Star Wars and has been since he was a child. But he was on a swim team, again, not quite a team sport in the same sense that others, but an individual, and he did okay. And he found, particularly in Alaska at Kodiak, a bunch of people who shared his interests in video games, and so he would socialize with them. A schizoid personality would like video games but wouldn't like doing them with others. Okay, that's kind of the difference, if you will. So he, in my opinion, he really doesn't share the thing, and to some degree, it's a personality disorder. Usually, is someone who is trouble to other people, okay? So some of the personality disorders, for example, an antisocial personality disorder is the disorder of a chronic criminal who will steal your car and break into your house, and they enjoy their disorder, other people suffer. Or the hypochondriac who's continually complaining about physical problems and going to doctors and badgering their families with imaginary. So it's a pervasive kind of thing. It goes back to adolescence, and it's really seriously disruptive. That's not who he is. He can socialize. But not a lot. And when he finds people who share his interests, his basically one friend from high school, they share their computer games, and that's how they interact, very rarely face to face and the like.
So if I understand what you're saying, is like, in your opinion, he did not suffer from a schizoid disorder, right?
Schizoid personality disorder, he did not, in my opinion.
And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but did you also say he did not suffer from a personality disorder?
Correct.
Okay. And did you consider informing your opinion, sir, whether he suffered from a major depressive disorder?
I did.
And what was your opinion concerning that?
Well, the term major depressive disorder is a difficult term. Anything that starts with major is not kind of crisp and scientific. So kind of the quip is, what's the difference between major surgery and minor surgery? Major surgery is surgery on me. Minor surgery is surgery on you. So it's a terrible diagnostic term, and I've said so under oath many times. But it is for a biological disorder of mood, the so-called chemical imbalance. The brain chemicals that control mood for some individuals can have the tendency to get out of control. And so typically in midlife, someone will become depressed without any external reason for the depression. And they will withdraw from things they used to enjoy, they will lose weight, they'll become morose and tearful, they will have a disturbed sleep pattern, which usually means waking up early in the morning, ruminating and worrying about things over and over again, and they can't get free of it. And it's a genetic disorder, and it tends to run in families. So when you see a patient with these symptoms, a psychiatrist would say, does anybody in your family have similar situations? And quite characteristically, you'll find a strong family history of episodes of depression. Some of them can go back, if it's a serious disorder, even into early adulthood, late adolescence, where there are periods where a person becomes depressed and they really have no reason for it externally that would justify that. And typically in this current circumstance, so where we are now, there's medications to reset the chemical balance. Drugs like Prozac, for example, Zoloft, antidepressant medications that can readjust the brain chemicals so that your mood is appropriate to what's happening in your life. If good things are happy things are happening, you can be happy, okay? If your life is terrible in reality, you'll be unhappy about that, but it's not because your regulator of mood is set too low and you can't appreciate positive things in your life. You're just miserable without an obvious external cause, as opposed to someone who has, probably will all be subject to a type of depression, which is reactive depression, for which grief is the prototype. You lose someone or something you value, okay? Imagine a parent losing a child, the heartache that's a reality situation. And the major depression is this biological, genetically driven, chemically mediated problem with mood.
And so your opinion was that Mr. Loya was not suffering from a major depressive disorder?
Correct.
Thank you. And did you consider a delusional disorder with respect to Mr. Loya?
Yes.
And what was your opinion concerning that?
I think that he was in a delusional state in the many months running up to the terrible event that happened. Delusional disorder is sometimes is in some classifications a different situation than his. His delusional disorder stems from the inability to process the relationship with Lisa. A delusional disorder is often a midlife situation and can sometimes be precipitated by an event, a divorce, and then the person becomes very involved in not only paranoid and suspicious about the spouse, but then it extends to the court and to the lawyers and to the whole system, and it's fixed. There's no medication that really can budge the person out of it. You can't reality test with them, and it's just kind of a fixed midlife state, usually of people 45 to 55, and once it sets in, it's very, very unlikely to change. But that's not, I think he was delusional, but I don't think he would meet the criteria for my understanding of delusional disorder, capital D.
And did you prepare a report, sir?
I did.
I just asked you to kind of look at this and tell me if you recognize what this is.
Yes, this is my report.
You know, I'd offer that.
By agreement.
Let me see at the sidebar.
What?
And doctor, after performing your examination, you've spoken with me, fair to say?
Yes,
Did you speak with Mr. Segadelli?
I did.
And how much did you charge us?
Well, I spoke with you about a year ago, only recently with him.
Right. We spoke recently, didn't we? Okay. And how much did you charge us?
I charge $400 per hour.
Do you know what the total was?
I don't.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
All right. Jurors, take a morning break. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.
All rise for the jury.
outside. Morning break, please. Jury's out of the room. Anything further at this time, counsel?
The defense.
All right, thank you. Morning recess. Can I see, I don't need a record on this. Mr. Glennie, Mr. Segadelli.
That's why they won't let you see No, that's called texting.
We ready for the jurors? Let's bring them down, please.
Dr. I believe Dr. Kelly's right outside, too.
I'm sorry?
Dr. Kelly's right outside the door.
Very good.
No, thank you.
Yeah, bring the jurors in. Sure.
Somebody say, Mr. Glennie. Did you hear that? I don't know. Do we have a clean copy of Bridgewater guy's report?
Oh,
I thought you had one in your, I think I might have wrote on it. I don't, maybe I didn't. Let's take a look, shall we?
Doctor, how have you been?
Good.
Good, good.
I don't have in here. Let's do it.
Good. There's a nasty rumor going around that you and I are twins separated at birth, you know, with
Yeah, that's a great
hair and, yeah.
The other one is Boston. You never see Mike Malone or Dr. Kelly in the same
Picture?
We were kind of a trust.
Jurors entering, all rise, please. Court is now in session. Please be seated.
Counsel, when you're ready,
Thank you,
please.
Your Honor. Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
Doctor, you indicated originally you were hired by the district attorney's office.
That's correct.
When, as best you can, were you retained? Or were you brought on to give this opinion?
Early 2016, probably January or February 2016.
And I see what we've entered as evidence, your evaluation, sir, is dated November the 19th of 16.
Correct.
So it was some 11 months
Yes.
to do your report. You indicated your educational background, Tufts Medicine, and you went on internship and then a psych degree, or your medical degree from Tufts. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
What year was that?
1965.
And are you certified?
Yes, I am.
With who?
I'm board certified in psychiatry,
What year?
1972.
So it's fair to say you've testified before you, doctor. You've testified before.
Yes.
In all of those courts you mentioned, federal court and all the different superior courts in the state, always qualified as an expert.
They let me
I
testify.
object.
Overruled.
And you've given opinions
On
before.
second- Yeah, wait a minute. On second thought, let me revisit that ruling. Jurors, simply because a court has allowed someone to testify as an expert is in no way an imprimatur of credibility. Sorry to have this discussion in your presence, doctor, but you're the first one up, okay? It is in no way an imprimatur as to the credibility of that witness. It is simply a recognition that there is some academic achievement, some experience, and some interaction with the facts of the case that allows the person to testify. Whether jurors believe some of it, all of it, or none of it is entirely up to the jurors. The fact that someone has allowed this witness to testify in court as a judge is not a determination of credibility. It's always for the jurors to decide, do you believe all that the witness says, some of it, or none of it? Anything further in that regard at this time?
Not from Come up.
Nothing from the defense.
Thank you.
Doctor, in those times you've testified, you've given your opinion like you have today as it relates to criminal responsibility.
I have,
Approximately how many times, doctor?
well, probably in total 300 or 400 times in
As it relates
40-plus years of doing this. Yeah.
Okay. And I believe you answered Mr. Glennie that at least in the majority of the times it's been testifying for the prosecution.
At the request of the prosecution, yes.
Now, doctor, in undertaking a responsibility such as this one, you obviously accumulate your data resources or all the information you talked about gathering before seeing Mr. Loya. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
And that data was received from Mr. Glennie and any and all other sources, right?
Yes,
Now, you indicated you saw Mr. Loya on how many occasions?
3.
And you indicated those meetings lasted from 2.5 to 3 hours apiece.
correct.
Now, is that important?
I thought I needed to do that, yes.
Okay. I mean, diagnostically speaking, is that something that's a prerequisite to give an opinion?
Yes.
And where does that prerequisite come from?
Well, not only is it reasonable to do that, but there's a general ethical principle in psychiatry that you should not render an opinion about individuals if you have not examined them. Some of that has been in the news recently about President Trump and whether mental health professionals should offer opinions concerning him. And so that's caught a lot of recent press.
Where did it first start, that theory of not rendering an opinion?
It was the Goldwater rule. It was when Barry Goldwater, who was a conservative Republican, was considering running for president against John F. Kennedy in the, 62 or thereabouts. And some group of psychiatrists had basically signed a letter that he was probably unfit because he was suspicious and paranoid. And that led to the American Psychiatric Association putting into its ethical guidelines that you shouldn't render opinions without, particularly about public figures, but generally. Now, there are some situations in which that's not possible. If you're asked about a suicide case, you're not going to be able to interview the deceased, but that is a general ethical principle.
And you said that ethical principles in for short, the APA guidelines?
The American Psychiatric Association guidelines.
Now, you also had numerous records you reviewed from Bridgewater State Hospital,
Correct,
police reports again from the district attorney's office,
correct.
a pretty extensive Coast Guard investigation.
Yes,
You likewise, doctor, took into consideration when forming your opinion, a Dr. Daniels report dated January the 14th of 2016.
correct.
He's a psychologist, doctor?
I believe he is, yes.
You also reviewed a significant amount of material that I believe you identified as coming from Adrian Loya.
Correct.
Could you tell us about some of those documents? We've heard about many of them, but
The most extensive one was called Lawyers' Wars, or Wrath of Lawyer. It's a 250-page document that he prepared to give a lot of the background and the planning that went into this situation. A 22-page, single-spaced letter to Lisa, some emails back and forth between Lisa and he, and also between Anna and him. And other things that he had written. Those are the main ones that come to mind at this instant.
In reviewing the Coast Guard documents, did you come upon and read and deem of some significance in forming your opinion what's termed a page 7?
I did.
Now, likewise, you reviewed the reports from the Barnstable County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
And again, not to simply repeat yourself, you gave your opinion, Doctor, and could you give it to us one more time?
My opinion is that Adrian Loya suffers from a condition in the autism spectrum, which I think is best categorized as high-functioning Asperger's disease, and that because of that disease, that he was unable to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, namely that the actions were driven or controlled by his brain disease rather than a simple exercise of free will, if you will.
Now, what is our legal standard we utilize, Doctor?
Well,
To your knowledge.
Well, I object.
Is the legal standard?
Yes.
He can have the question as to what standard this man utilized, what legal standard he utilized. Jurors, ultimately, the legal standard you're going to use will come from my instructions when I give you the charge. Certainly, though, counsel can ask what standard the doctor applied.
Could you answer that, please, Doctor?
Yes. My understanding of the standard is that a person may be found not guilty by reason of mental illness if they have a mental disease or defect, that it's present and active at the time, and that as a result of that mental disease or defect, either of two things flow from that disease or defect. They lack the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness or criminality of their conduct, or that they lack the substantial capacity to conform their conduct to the requirements of the law, namely to behave in a lawful situation in this manner.
So it's a two-pronged, is that fair, Doctor?
Correct.
And you focused more on the second prong, the inability due to the disease to conform his conduct to the requirements of law, correct?
Correct.
Now, likewise, I think you used the words, the disease was active at the time.
Correct.
That time we're talking about would be February the 5th of 2015, correct?
Correct.
And looking back at that particular day, you watched a certain video of an interrogation/interview of Mr. Loya immediately after the events that occurred in Bourne. Is that
Correct.
fair? How long was that interview, if you recall?
It was extensive. I'm not remembering the minutes, but it might have been a half an hour to an hour, something. It was not just a brief one, and as I recall, some people came in part way and the like. So I just don't have a discrete memory, but it wasn't just a quick kind of interview. And he was
diagnosed, I'm sorry.
and he was very anxious to tell his story. So
Particular interest, when you say tell a story, is it fair to call that story pretty significant detail?
extreme detail.
Is the same and similar the Lawyer Wars or the other material produced by Adrian Loya?
Yes, it's, in my opinion, part of his disorder. Namely, he has an incredible capacity for memory. Eidetic memory, hypothymesia is one of the words, technical words for it, where the person has the capacity to remember very many details that most of the rest of us would not be able to retain. Okay, a little bit think Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman kind of thing, and that incredible memory for details, and he's very insistent on telling the details. In fact, he would talk uninterrupted with me to make sure all the details, and it's very important that all the details come across. And that, in my opinion, is another symptom of his
And some
disorder.
of those, the nature of those details, were they corroborated by other sources?
Yes,
Meaning their accuracy, doctor?
yes,
And that's, again, part of the spectrum of the autism
Yeah.
that you're talking about?
yes.
Now, in diagnosing an individual such as he, if you have 40-plus years or whatever it was, doctor, did you use any type of criteria to give him that designation?
Did I use any?
A criteria, for instance, that one references the DSM? Did that assist you in determining the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, doctor?
Frankly, no.
Okay, well, tell us more about that. What is this book and how do you use it?
It's a book that is, categorizes disorders. It originally came from a need to have similar criteria if you were doing research in multiple centers. So everybody would agree, these are the characteristics of schizophrenia. These are the characteristics of bipolar disorder. It's entirely consensus-driven. In other words, a lot of people who have an interest in post-traumatic stress disorder get together and they try to... It is problematic, frankly, in psychiatry, and I've said so many times, and it says in the book itself, you know, cautionary statement, don't use this. They are more tactful than that. They say, this may not be wisely used in criminal kind of settings. And I very much agree with that because it's kind of slavish cookbook kind of stuff. Now, if you're billing insurance companies, you better put in the numbers that are in that book or you won't
Okay.
get paid. But it's problematic, frankly.
It helps, and it was written for the clinicians, is that fair?
Correct.
And it's more about labeling than determining symptoms, isn't that fair?
No, it describes certain constellation of symptoms. If you got 4 out of the following 7, then that warrants the diagnosis of X. Now, you might have 5 out of 7 for another diagnosis, but that's the problem. It's not well-suited to complex kind of situations, frankly.
Let me take you back a moment, Doctor. Before you started each and every interview with him, and I think you said somewhere between 8 and 9 hours, did you check his mental status in any way?
Not formally, in the sense of, he came to the interview room, I observed him, he greeted me, he was appropriate. The first thing I do is to give him what is called a kind of warning, namely that I'm here at the request of the district attorney. There is a court order, but you don't have to talk with me. You can stop the interview at any point. If there's anything you don't want to get into, let me know and I'll work around it, things of that sort. So you let the person know that it's not like a police interrogation, if you will, that it's a psychiatric interview and it's not privileged. It's not like he came to my office as a patient and then I couldn't talk with anybody or write any reports unless I had their permission. So each of the sessions starts off with a kind of review of the circumstances and conditions. And you,
That helps you make a determination as to their mental status at the
Correct,
time, is
correct,
that fair?
correct.
Because people may present in a different way, determining where they are, or perhaps different medication they're giving, is that fair?
in general, particularly the different circumstances.
Now, you said the type of autism, police doctor, was the high-functioning Asperger's, and you gave us a few examples of that. And I'd just like to ask you about that. When you talk about high-functioning, and you mentioned a particular author, in fact, now a doctor, Temple Grandin, how does that play into Mr. Loya's case?
Well, it's an example of someone who's very functional, but has Asperger's disorder, knows she has Asperger's disorder, is able to use some of the aspects of her disorder to see and understand things that the rest of us would struggle to understand until she kind of explains it to them. So one of her great contributions has to do with animal welfare and feedlots and cattle and stuff like that. And she's been on 60 Minutes and she's interviewed fairly regularly. And she's a spokesman for people with Asperger's disorder, trying to reduce any stigma that's associated with it, but also to generally increase understanding.
Now, again, you used, and I just want to focus for a moment on the term high functioning. That's functioning, meaning you or I may not even notice it in a particular individual because they're functioning in day-to-day life. Is that fair?
Yes, that they're able to have a job, take care of themselves, they're not institutionalized, they're not living with their parents and being taken care of. Some in the autism spectrum are, but some, a small number, a relatively small percentage, can function pretty well in the world if they find tasks that are simpatico with their disorder and can socialize, particularly in situations that are not particularly ambiguous.
Okay, well,
With all due respect to the Coast Guard or any military organization, who's the leader is pretty clear, okay? You go up the rank and it's not ambiguous, okay? In a social situation, who's the leader of the group is not by how many stripes you have, if you will. And so military or very structured environments are easier for people with Asperger's to deal with and be in, and the same with computers.
Can we talk about then, Mr. Loya, with this, you've identified a disease or defect, and how he grew up and how he suffered with this autism or the high-functioning Asperger's and how it related to his life.
Was there a question there?
Well, his background, Doctor, you indicate, and you suggested in your page through Mr. Loya's background, starting with the Coast Guard in 2005. And I'd like to take you a bit back from there, because you said it was something hardwired through birth, right?
Yes.
And what is it in his life you identified which helped support your conclusion?
Well, it does, first, it doesn't look like he had a intense kind of bond with either of his parents, okay? Now, that may not be entirely their fault, or they may contribute to it, but a child with Asperger's is wired different, and couples who have children without the disorder and recognize there's something different. And it's not malicious and it's not bad, it's just that they're different. And so the most important affective connection that he probably made early on in his life was with his maternal grandmother. His father and mother had split. He was living with his father in El Paso, mainly being cared for. His father was at work most of the days. He would go to his maternal grandmother's house. And like many grandmothers, she's very accepting and very loving. And if he wants to play computer games, she would indulge him and be nice to him and things of that sort. So the degree to which he had an affective connection with a person, it most likely was with his maternal grandmother.
And after that period of his life, where did he go on from there, Doctor, if you recall?
Well, I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that often the individual, if they've got high-functioning Asperger's and he's not mute and grunting and things of that sort, it comes to the notice of your peers, and they can be kind of unkind, but they're grammar school, middle school, junior high school. He senses he's different, and they sense, and the way of kids, they called him Lurch from the Addams Family. They called him mute, not all the time, and he interacted with some of them, but he was perceived as different, and he was starting to perceive himself as somehow different, in my opinion.
And some of this background you're giving us now, you received from him, is that fair? You received some of this background from him, is that fair?
Yes, yes.
But it was corroborated by other members of his family and collateral sources, is that fair?
To some degree, yes.
And in fact, you spoke to mom and dad, didn't you?
I did not.
Didn't, okay. Did you receive information or the source of that
I
information?
think there were reports of interviews with him and descriptions of him by his parents in the materials that I reviewed.
Doctor, what significance is it that he identified himself as having or labeling himself some type of mental disease or defect?
Well, there's a question of whether personality disorders are a mental disease or defect. They're in the book, but they're descriptions of personality patterns. He perceived himself as being different, as having a problem, and typically he went online and started to look around, and he eventually came probably on DSM-5 and looked at the criteria, and he thought he fit them, okay? So now he had an understanding, I think an incomplete one. He has some schizoid features, a tendency to like to be alone much of the time and play computer games. But it was not kind of sufficient. But that was his search, if you will, to figure out, who am I? What's not right with me?
Doctor, he went on then with his life, and I think you identified a particular time around the time he enlists in the Coast Guard. And tell us about that and how that fits into your diagnosis and Mr. Adrian Loya.
He found, after high school, he went briefly to a community college, was not particularly interested and thought it was a waste of his time and his father's money. And then he did some things like tried sales for Coca-Cola, and it was something he didn't like. It was too hectic. Being a salesman is not particularly structured. You got to pick up on clues, got to close the deal, things of that sort. And then he thought about the service, and he thought the Coast Guard would be very good for a couple of reasons. One, that it had a reputation of taking care of its people, okay? An organization that took care of its people. It was not particularly militaristic. It was not about killing people. It was about saving people. And the structure was simpatico. The IT4, IT3, IT2, the ranks that go along.
IT was the part of the service that he
Yes,
was trained for, and that's working on the computers. The technical aspect of the computers, is that fair?
correct.
But his, do you remember his rank as an E5, I believe?
E5, he was a petty officer. E5 is a general rank, but he was IT2, which I think is either an E5 or an E6, but it's not an E2 or 3. The PFC, the private first class, the corporal, kind of in the old kind of scenario. So I don't know what his E rank is, but he was an IT2, which is one rank up from what Lisa was, which was an IT3.
He was stationed for several years in Virginia before going out to Alaska.
Yes, he was 4 years there, 2007 to 2011.
And now, go on, I'm sorry.
2007 to 2011, yeah.
He then was sent to Kodiak, Alaska, and what's your understanding of that environment in the Coast Guard?
Well, it's Alaska, so it's going to be cold, but it was relatively isolated, an island, if you will, relatively self-contained. In Virginia, it was a big organization with lots of Coast Guard folks, a lot of mid-level, older Coast Guard folks, but a lot of private contractors as well. So it's a busy, big organization. In Kodiak, Alaska, he was part of a group, I think they called it a shop, of 10 to 15 people who took care of the computers and the wiring and stuff up at there. And it was a very different kind of environment. And because it also was very different in that because it was so isolated, that the Coast Guard had lots of morale events, maybe monthly, where they would do something, a picnic, going out to a facility, a shooting range, something to keep morale up in the unit because it's relatively isolated, an island off Alaska.
How did he fit into that environment?
He found it very congenial generally, but then the issue of the relationship with Lisa developed. But generally, he found it pretty congenial. He did a reasonably good job. He was reasonably well-liked by most of the people up there.
So with this, again, disease or disorder, the autism, he fit in relatively well in that secluded base
Yes.
as a petty officer. Now, you mentioned Lisa, Doctor. How, if at all, did that affect Adrian Loya or their relationship?
That's a big question. I mean, that's a big topic. He arrived in July of 2011, and he was there for a few months. She arrived in the early fall, and he may have seen her at work, but that was not particularly memorable to him. They had one of these morale events in which they had a picnic, and they were by a river, and they were doing some fly fishing, and he eventually kind of went off a little bit by himself and separated himself from the group and was there kind of taking in the surroundings. And Lisa sought him out and came up to him. And that was the beginning of their relationship. And she was pleasant and funny and smart and outgoing, and he liked talking with her.
So was her connection / friendship with him and at all, in your opinion, Doctor, in those early stages abnormal?
Well, it was more platonic friendship. Eventually, over the months, late months of that year, 2011, he came to find out that she was in a relationship. He eventually found out that she was engaged to be married, and eventually that she was engaged to be married to another woman. And that kind of evolved October, November, December. In December, she left and was married at the end of December.
What, if anything, did that do to their relationship as it was at that time?
At that time, prior to her marriage, it was friendly, platonic, not particularly boy-girl kind of thing. Her car broke down, so she needed a ride from off base to work. So for several weeks, they didn't have a complete inability to do that. I'm trying to suggest that there is a spectrum. He did not, once he found out she was in a relationship, he didn't appear to be interested or follow through on that. And that's kind of the literal kind of way he does it. Don't have a relationship with someone you work with, okay? That's kind of one of the rules that he's kind of picked up along the way. So but he very much enjoyed being with her, enjoyed her friendship and the like. In the time frame now, late 2011.
When you just said you said one of the rules, is that a moralistic stance that he holds?
It's a good idea not to have a relationship with people you work with, but for him, it's like people intuitively know that. Most people intuitively know that. For him, it's like, okay, I get it. It's kind of a rule, but it's almost like he has to be told it or has to have heard it, or it's not like the intuition that most people would have.
Or to fraternize with somebody who's a subordinate in the military service?
Correct.
Now, upon or after their marriage, did you get some information about Anna and Lisa going back to that Kodiak base?
Yes.
And how, if at all, did that affect Adrian Loya and Lisa's relationship?
Well, they arrived back on the base in January of 2012. And Anna and Lisa were now living off base, and they were newlyweds. And the first encounter, I believe, was kind of a social event in which people in the group, the shop, the little unit, decided that they would like to meet Lisa's spouse. And so they gathered, I think, at a bar. She was introduced and things of that sort. And that was pleasant enough. And then there was the first of what is a lot of incidents. He, for some reason, could not get packages delivered to where he lived. So Lisa said, you can have your packages delivered to my place and you can pick them up there. And that had been a pattern that had gone on well prior to the marriage in the fall. One day after work, he and a friend went over because there was a package for him at Lisa and Anna's apartment. He went to pick up the package, and Anna seemed annoyed or something of that sort. It was not kind of just giving him his package and saying, okay. And he thought that was kind of strange. And then Lisa brought it up to him afterwards, saying, don't go to the apartment without calling ahead. Now, he would characterize that as Lisa yelled at me, but I think it's unlikely she was yelling at him. She was just saying things, but he would process any negative thing as a, quote, yell or something stronger.
So let me ask you that. Is it his disease, doctor, you're saying, affects his ability to interpret
Correct.
another? And
Correct.
that's one of the...
But again, not total, but mostly, significantly, but not absolutely like a very disturbed autistic individual, child or adult.
So again, not a total inability to recognize what happened.
Correct.
And you indicated, just if you could briefly, were there other incidents in and around that time, you talked about a mail drop. Was there an incident at work when he had to actually give her an order to go out and get another fellow named Luke and come back in?
There were many instances, and his memory is much better than mine is going to be, okay? The situation with Luke was, he was kind of, had a higher rank and would give assignments and, quote, orders, but he was not one of these give orders kind of guys. At any rate, Lisa and Luke liked to work together, and they would kind of set it up that they would, in his opinion, arrange to kind of scoop the project so the two of them could work together. At a particular point, he said there was a certain thing to be done, and he basically told her to do this project either with him or with someone else, but not with Luke. And she got upset, quote, yelled at him, but mostly when she would get upset with him, she would not speak to him at work.
How did Adrian react, first say to the mail drop incident?
Picking up the package,
Yeah, that,
he was kind of confused. He didn't understand what the problem was. He was there with someone else just to pick up a package. What was the problem, if you will? But he had been told, don't go over there unless you call ahead of time. And he was just puzzled by Anna's reaction.
and going on from there, how did he treat Lisa, if you know, if you recall? How did he treat Lisa going on from that incident? Did he give her the silent treatment, Doctor?
I don't remember for sure. She was more likely to give him the silent treatment, although he would, at one occasion, said, I would do the robot thing, meaning he would act robotically or stiffly or something. But I can't remember which of the incidents that are detailed in this 265-page, single-spaced kind of document. So I'll do my best to, if you bring up
The
specific.
document, which is, again, extremely detailed, consistent with somebody with this disease?
Correct.
The autism doctor. Now, calling your
I would
attention.
prefer Asperger's.
Asperger's. So calling your attention now to one about September of 2012, Doctor, there was a period of time when wife Anna went away for some type of training. Do you recall an incident that happened in that month?
Yes.
And could you tell us about that?
This was kind of the pivotal incident in all of this. They both are on computers, and like people on computers, they're on them late at night. And so you wouldn't think of calling someone up at 11 o'clock, but if you text them, if they're up, they can respond to you. So he gets a text that appears to come from Lisa, but he's suspicious. So he texts her, did you really just text me? She says, yes, I did. Do you want to come over and bring your Simpsons video and some vodka and come over and we'll watch The Simpsons? He picks up that she seems a little giddy and maybe she's a little bit been drinking. And he doesn't kind of pick up on the clue. Maybe this is not a good idea to go over there at 11 o'clock, and particularly when I think the other person might have been drinking. But he goes over, and he is not expecting, in my opinion, a sexual encounter. What happens is he goes, he puts on The Simpsons. She's sitting on a small love seat. He's sitting on the floor, but that's kind of uncomfortable. She says, come up, sit beside me, and then starts basically an amorous invitation to him to basically engage in sexual intimacy. And it first involves several attempts on her part, literally, to get him to go to bed and be in bed with her. And he's panicking at this time by his own description and doesn't know what to make of it. He's concerned about her safety. Literal, concrete, I'm concerned about her safety. Should I just leave her in this intoxicated state, or should I stay the night, make sure that she's okay?
Look, can I just slow you down a bit, Doctor? So there's this flirtation situation on the couch, and they've shared a drink. Is that fair?
Yes.
Watching The Simpsons sometimes after midnight.
Yep,
I think she attempts to kiss him, and at least in his view.
yes,
Is that fair? He understands she's under the influence and concerned, correct? And then there's some overture to come join me in my bed for some activity. Okay, and now,
And-
to that event,
and,
come on.
and apropos of the thunder, she goes in the bed, he hears a sound like she has fallen. So he goes to the bedroom door, he knocks on it, and suddenly she's leaning against the door jamb, opens the door for him, and again entreats him to go to bed.
So there's been those occurrences in front of the television, denial. He hears the noise and he goes for what? For her safety, doctor?
Correct,
Door opens and again, it's something to the effect of come to bed with me, right?
correct.
Now, his interpretation, pursuant to all your source material and everything you've read, she didn't really have a memory of this, right?
Correct,
And this came from him,
correct.
right? Is it reality-based?
In my opinion, it is.
It is, okay.
He doesn't make up things. I mean, it's not his,
Pretty forthcoming in all the time you spent with him?
yes,
And all the records and documents and hospital material you've
yes,
seen?
yes,
This is the long statement he gave to the police corroborated by all the other evidence as well, Doctor?
yes,
Now, again, now we're at a point where in the bedroom, and to her invitation to come to bed, how does he react?
he's panicked. He's not interested in it. He doesn't kind of know what to make of it. But he's not interested in it, and he's kind of experiencing a kind of panicky feeling. What should I do? And he's in a dilemma. And finally, when she goes to bed and stays in bed, and he sits on the love seat for the rest of the night, not sleeping and trying to process what just happened.
Did he indicate he was in fact,
I'm sorry?
Chair?
Sure, let's get the doctor a chair, please.
I'll take the chair. This is going on.
You can have the chair, Doc, but you gotta keep your voice up, okay?
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
and did he indicate at that time in her apartment there was almost a paralysis of his body, Doctor?
Yes,
Yeah, and he waited until the next morning, until he left her, he talked to her, and he could see she didn't even remember what had occurred.
correct.
Please take us of the events, take us after that, the events which followed.
I'll do my best summary of those events. Let me speak up. Initially, he was concerned, and apparently she was, because she asked him to text her when he got home, which he did. And for the next several weeks, he was terribly preoccupied with this, and probably in October might have told a couple of friends about what happened. And their reaction was, you ought to feel good about yourself for not taking advantage of her. He still was preoccupied with it, and her attitude at work had changed about him. She was giving him more the silent treatment. And he finally went to, I think it's called work life, which is kind of human resources, EAP type program, and met with a woman there only on one occasion. And she basically said to him what his friends had said. She's not really a good friend of yours. You ought to try to avoid having much to do with her. And that was pretty much the end of it, that in the next, I think November of 2012 was when he went to work life.
When you indicate preoccupied, you use that word. This was a simple night of little flirtation or more, right?
He couldn't dismiss it. He was obsessed with it. What did it mean? What's the implication of it? He turns out that in November there was a class on sexual harassment in the military that everybody must go to. So in the context of that, he started to think, gee, I was harassed. He was not, at this point, going to report it anywhere. He was just trying to come to grips with it in some fashion. And that's when he had the conversation. I know around that time he had the conversation with the woman at work life. So then things went ahead. I believe there was a kind of New Year's Eve party that was pleasant enough, and that Anna and Lisa and many of the folks went to. And so throughout this period, there's kind of ups and downs in their relationship, and he's kind of puzzled by it. And
Tell me, you said ups and downs in the relationship. But he's functioning with this disease you've identified, is that fair?
correct.
He's functioning to a particular degree where he could take orders, follow orders, go about his business, is that fair?
Correct.
He eventually, as you said, went and told not only the human rights or whatever,
But
he
he-
went and told some friends at a party, did he not?
Yes.
And what ultimately bubbled up in him that forced him to do that, if he could?
Forced him to do what?
Well, that he eventually went and thought he had to tell people about this, or the event.
Well, let me back up a little bit. The first time that there was any interaction with the supervisors about it actually preceded the night where there was this encounter. And that was in the summer of 2012. It was in one of those periods in which she was kind of giving him the silent treatment, and it might have been around the Luke incident. I'm not sure whether it was for sure. But at any rate, early summer of 2012, it was one of the down periods, if you will. And he also made a mistake at work on the computers, which caused a kind of biggish problems in communication for the air base for a couple of days. And so he, for the first time that I can see, got depressed. Now I'm talking reactively depressed. Lisa's not being friendly to him. He's kind of screwed up and caused a biggish problem with the air base in Kodiak because of something on the computers. And he stopped working out, he stopped playing computer games, he lost weight, he couldn't sleep, he was taking over-the-counter Benadryl, and his immediate supervisor at work noticed it and asked him to come in and talk about it. And in the context of talking about it, he told him about Lisa and the up and downs in their relationship. So the supervisor had Lisa come in, and they had a conversation. Everybody decided they'd be friendly, and he was elated and kind of non-depressed. Okay, we're going to be talking with one another, we're going to be friends, all of this is going to go away, and everything is going to be really nice. And that precedes by a few weeks the evening in which she invites him to come over. So that's the first time that anything was reported. The second time was the work-life November, 2 months after that evening. And the sexual harassment presentation for
How, you used the word depression, doctor, how would you characterize that depression after he crashed the computers?
Apropos earlier, Mr. Glennies, that's a reactive depression, okay? I screwed up. I have great pride in my work, and now, whoa, the air base has got some serious problems, and I'm responsible for it. And kind of the most important relationship, the person that's kind of most important to me, Lisa, I'm on the outs with her, kind of. So it's in reaction to those events that he is reactively depressed.
Now, once their superiors spoke to them about it, the Coast Guard learned about this September incident at her home between the,
No, it doesn't learn about that till the spring of 2013, when things are winding down. Both Lisa and he are going to be terminating their assignment in June-ish of their, and it's not until the spring of 2013 that the Coast Guard kind of officially comes to know about it.
okay, and they started an investigation, is that fair?
That's correct. There are some intermediate steps before that.
Again, it was September of 2012, the incident occurred, that
Correct.
this lawyer told you. And now it was the spring at some point, Coast Guard finds out about it and starts an investigation, is that fair?
Yes, that's fair, but there are several things that lead up to that.
Well, please tell us about those
Okay.
certain things.
We've mentioned the 22-page letter that he sent to Lisa. That probably was sent in February of 2013. And at the same time, he sent a copy to Anna, feeling she should have a copy of it. And in his cover email to it, for which there's an attachment, he says, I think you ought to know this. I don't mean any harm by it. It's terrible. We have not been able to work out a nice relationship between the three of us. So he sends that to Lisa and to Anna, but he sends it to Anna's Coast Guard email, not her personal one.
Let me suggest, jurors, that you take a stretch for a minute, please. Just take up a stretch. Stand up, stretch. Take a break for a second. In fact, maybe a walk back up to the jury room would be good for you all.
Rise, please.
Yes, that's right. I go, but I think he's gonna say why he did what he did.
Sorry to interrupt, Doctor.
Okay.
You can step aside for 5 minutes. Let me see counsel.
Jurors entering, all rise, please.
Do you allow the jurors to ask questions?
No.
Definitely beginning lawyers.
No.
Okay.
What generation do you think I'm from?
Court is now in session. Please be seated.
You're ready, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, I took you to a time after the September incident at her apartment, and you indicated, as you did in your report, that over the next some 9 months, Mr. Loya became very preoccupied and obsessed about the encounter.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that obsession?
That he couldn't get it out of his mind, that it was, I mean, he could focus on things at work, he could socialize some, but it kept on intruding in his thoughts. Remembers vividly each detail of what happened, from we mixed the vodka with pineapple juice and little tiny little details. But it was something he couldn't just forget about and move on in his life. So it would intrude on his thoughts fairly regularly.
Okay, can you reconcile that with his mental disorder that you've identified?
Yes, most people would be able to eventually say, I'm moving on, she was drinking, I'm not going to think much of it, let's just move ahead. He had to, he didn't have to. His condition was such that he couldn't just dismiss it. Some people say, you should be proud of yourself for not taking advantage of her, and others said, she was willing to have sex, you should have had sex with her. He could understand, or he couldn't do either. He couldn't do either, he didn't quite understand those.
Did his preoccupation lead him or motivate him to write that 22 or 23-page letter, single-spaced?
I think it was the whole relationship. It wasn't just the encounter that night. He was trying to understand and figure out their relationship, but particularly try to explain his feelings for her, if you will, that they weren't amorous, they were not sexual, she was a special friend that somehow he got on his wavelength and he could feel very comfortable with her, and he didn't mean to disrupt her life or didn't mean to disrupt her relationship with Anna. It was, again, 22 pages, single-spaced, but it wasn't just from that evening, it was trying to process the whole relationship.
When he wrote, for instance, Doc, do you have an opinion about when he wrote, I meant no harm by it, was he telling the truth?
In my opinion, yes.
Now, going on, at some point, the Coast Guard started some type of investigation into it that was not resolved by that summer. Is that fair?
Right. He eventually, after agonizing about it, and he was in therapy about the situation, and finally, it appears that his therapist advised him, you're so preoccupied, she had about 9 sessions with the psychologist, you're so preoccupied with it, you ought to officially report it to the Coast Guard. And so he did, but he broke down in his initial interview, and before he made it official that he was going to submit it, but he was in tears as he was telling the Coast Guard investigative services about the relationship and how troubled he was by it. So it wasn't like they went out and went after him for some reason, or that Lisa precipitated. It was, he was still obsessed with the relationship and was, on advice of his therapist, go ahead officially, maybe that will bring a resolution to this situation. And frankly, he expected that he would be exonerated, if you will, that he would not be found at fault, and that if the situation had been reversed, that he would justly have been found for sexual harassment.
Well, doctor, he was obsessed with the fact that he was the victim, was he not?
Yes. Well, he would become much more focused on being a victim later. But at that point, yes, it's fair to say that he considered himself the victim of what she did to him.
And you indicated he had some 9 sessions with a psychiatrist up there at Kodiak?
It appears that it was a psychologist. There's been no, the records, the psychologist has not been able to be found, but.
But he did seek help.
He did. It appears to be a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. It might have been a social worker.
And he was referred by the Coast Guard.
I'm not sure how he got there. He did go to the equivalent of work life, and again, there's so many details here. They may have recommended it, or he might have found a therapist on his own. I don't know.
You indicated when the Coast Guard Investigative Services interviewed him, he broke down again, crying and so on and so forth?
Yes.
Now, had that Coast Guard investigation resolved itself with any conclusions by the time he was sent from that base to his next assignment?
It had not.
Okay, when was he sent to his next assignment, and do you know where?
And he was sent to his next assignment in June to report the 1st of July back in the Virginia, Chesapeake area.
Doctor?
Yeah, yes.
And how, if you recall, did he get back to that base?
Well, he drove basically cross country to the base, and he made some stops along the way.
And when he stopped, he attempted to see his father, well, with a particular interest to see his dog, right?
Yes.
Tell us about, please, the dog, and why, as you indicate in your report, it was a very significant event.
A little bit the backstory. He would spend summers with his mother in in San Antonio, I believe. And on one occasion, he was there, and there was a 4th of July celebration, and he said, let's take the dog, previous dog, Ginger. No, they won't allow dogs there. They go to the fireworks and picnic, people in their blankets, and they got their dogs, and he's really annoyed with it. They come back home, Ginger is missing. The next day, they're driving along the road, and they see a mask that looks the color of it, and it turns out that Ginger had escaped with the fireworks probably and was hit by a car and killed. The mother promptly replaced the dog, Ginger, with Tawny, and he was determined when he next saw her around the holidays. She had just plugged in another dog as far as he was concerned, and he was determined not to like this replacement dog. But as it turns out, the dog, Tawny, was pretty persistent, and you can read it in his narrative, the 250. And so eventually they formed a very close bond. And when he could have a dog with him in the Coast Guard, he asked his mother if he could take Tawny with him in his first land assignment, 2007, also in the Chesapeake, his first 4 years there. And Tawny was the main affective connection he had there. Now, he did socialize some. He did go to work. He was not regarded as bizarre, but the dog was very important to him. He would describe coming home, playing some computer games, often falling asleep on the floor with the dog, or the dog in his bed. When he got, and he would describe incidents, and I think it's in the thing he wrote, the 250-plus page. The dog and he would play, and at one point the dog disrobed him, first taking his hat, then his shirt, then his pants, gnawing and pulling it off. And it was a very close relation. Now, many people with Asperger's get a real, we're all fond of our pets, okay? But somehow, for many people with Asperger's, pets are very, it's even a notch above and the like. So he goes to Alaska. You can't have a dog in Alaska. So his father says, I'll take care of the dog, and when you finish your assignment, you come back, pick up the dog, and you're on your way with the dog. He would check in the 2 years he was in Alaska, and his father would say, the dog's fine, getting older, a little more elderly and an older dog, but the dog is fine. He comes to El Paso, no one is home, but he is told how to get through the garage into the backyard, and he finds Tawny non-responsive, covered with sores and feces, does not respond to his name, and is essentially moribund. So he picks up the dog, tries to get it some water, it's not taking any water, and then brings him to a vet and has the dog put down. He vows to have nothing more to do with his father or his family. That's it. And then he proceeds the rest of the way cross country to his new assignment.
And why, again, do you use those words, please, Doctor? Very significant event?
Well, the dog was very inordinately important to him. He was companion in his first land assignment in the Coast Guard. He had a particularly close connection. He was expecting, okay, I'll find my dog who's going to be older and a little more decrepit, but the dog will be healthy enough and we'll go to my new assignment and I'll start my new assignment. There's been no resolution of anything in Alaska, so at that point, he's heading to his new assignment, assuming he's going to pick up his now elderly dog and resume the next phase of his career.
He doesn't pick up his dog, Doctor, and does he go on to his new assignment in Chesapeake?
He does.
And assume he finds housing and his new assignments. What, if anything, happens of significance with his life in the Coast Guard at that point?
Well, his first day at the job, the new supervisor greets him and says, welcome, but there's a page 7 in your file. Now, a page 7 is a very serious thing in the Coast Guard. It is a permanent part of your record and becomes, it's a place where disciplinary kinds of things and inappropriate things, bad things happen. You get written up on a page 7, and it stays in your record permanently and will affect your career subsequently, promotions, assignments, and the like. And so he is told there's a page 7, and then they give him the page 7. And in my report, I included in my report a copy of it and what it said.
That they determined, Doctor, his actions were inappropriate as it related to Lisa Berlanger, which is an IT3. Is that fair?
Correct.
And she was in his direct chain of command?
Correct.
And he's referred to the manual about the prohibitions against harassment in the workplace. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, are they asked in that line of the military to sign or / accept such a thing as a page 7?
They ask you to do it. He refused to because it turned things, in his opinion, and likely correctly, upside down, that he was being blamed for what happened with her. So he refused to sign it. It's like a performance evaluation you might have in a job situation in which your supervisor says, did you see this? And if you disagree, you may have a paragraph. I don't think that's how it is with the military. It is, and he had no process of appeal in the military. The 7 is there, it's a permanent part of your record. But he was not going to sign it as if he agreed with what was in that page 7.
Well, Doctor, he recognized himself as being the victim, didn't he?
Yes.
And the Coast Guard didn't see it that way?
No, they blamed him for the situation.
And you indicate after your thorough exam of all of the information and speaking with him for some 8 to 9 hours, this point, the summer of 13, you indicate, Doctor, a serious change in his mental state, demeanor, and preoccupations. Could you explain that to us?
Well, it was kind of in phases. Initially, he was in shock and trying to process it. And eventually, he was aware there was no appeal. The people in the new place said, you start with a clean slate with us, but he knew that the page 7 was a permanent part of his record. And then over the next basically year and a half, he starts to, again, obsess about what he considers a monstrous injustice done to him, and in that sense is a victim. And then sees Lisa as the source of that injustice because of her inviting him over and what happened that night. And then the Coast Guard now made it even worse. So he's lost his dog. He's now kind of lost his career in the Coast Guard. He's not fired, but this permanent page 7 is going to be part of his record. And he is starting to feel like, I don't have anything to live with, and he gets somewhat depressed during this period of time.
He came to regard Lisa, Doctor, as your report indicates, a rapist and morally corrupt person who had ruined his life. Is that what you're saying, Doctor?
It over the next period of months, he did. It's not like he woke up one morning and said that. It's just he's brooding about the situation. He sees her as the source of it. He sees the Coast Guard as being complicit with it, that he has nothing left in life that he values, okay? And she is the personification of evil. She's a monster. She has ruined him. She's wrecked his mind. Eventually, he comes to regard.
He needed to be confronted, punished, and killed.
Correct.
Is that reality-based?
That's what he thought. It's not reality-based. Again, someone without this condition might have said, I'm starting with a free, I'll have a nice career. I'll show the Coast Guard that I am a good, productive person. He can't do that. He's so locked in his relatively fixed way of thinking about things. So he thinks that she deserves to die for what she did to him. But if he takes her life, he deserves to die. Now, it's that combination that evolves over the next year and a half.
Over the next, I think you suggest some 16 months in the elaborate operation, as we've talked about.
Well, the operation part probably starts halfway there. I mean, he's brooding about how will I do that? And then, well, if I'm going to kill her, first I've got to figure out where does she live, okay? And so he goes online and various kinds of things and finds out that she's assigned to the Cape, and then he does other computer, Google, or some sort of things, and finds out where she lives. And now she knows where she is. And then comes the, okay, how am I going to take her life and have my life taken essentially at the same time.
And was that a required part of his operation that he must pay for?
Absolutely, that is part of who he is. When I saw him, and currently, according to the records of Bridgewater, he feels he deserves to die for what he did. But it would be improper for him to take his own life. So he's hoping that somehow his life will be taken.
Why is it, I'm sorry, go on, I interrupted.
Because he feels he does not deserve to live because of what he did to Lisa. And that's part of his brain conditions. That's not how most people would think, okay?
You consider him being in a depression at that time?
Well, yes, there's a reactive depression too. I lost the last few months, years with my dog, Tony. I lost, in his mind, my career. I just want a career that something I can do well enough, make money, spend a little time with him, but mostly be preoccupied or spend time video gaming, Star Wars, things of that sort.
But now you talked about his, at least in his own mind, his career with the Coast Guard is doomed because of the page 7, correct?
Correct.
He's never had a close family bond or relationship, is that accurate?
Yes, I think that is accurate.
Tell us, though, no close connection with friends. Do you know about this Jacob Heller, don't you?
I do.
And was that a close relationship?
In my opinion, no. They have a friendship, and he's had some friendships with people, including in Alaska. But it's not kind of the conventional best friend. We do lots of stuff together. What they do together, and it's intermittent and sometimes months apart, is they go online and they play some games or they Skype or things of that sort. He went across country with Jacob in 2011 on his way to Alaska, driving across country, dropping off the dog. By the time he got to the West Coast, he was relieved that Jacob was going to be leaving. It was almost too much face to face, if you will. And he was now yearning for I want to have my own place and my video games, and I'll go to work and I'll come back and I want to get my own space.
Are this preoccupation and/or when you're talking about this obsessions, is this something his neighbors or others may notice, or people in his work environment?
No. This was all kind of private. I mean, he had a particular point, probably 6 months or more prior to the homicide, he started to go to these airsoft facilities, and these are like camps where people use pellet guns or other kinds of, get in teams, and they hunt one another and kind of thing. And he found that fun, and people knew he was doing it. They didn't know he was doing it for the purpose of preparing for an armed confrontation with the police after he killed Lisa.
So that was a form of practice for him.
And he found it fun too. I mean, but it was his motivation to do it was to kind of get into a paramilitary combat-y type situation.
You determined through all of the material you reviewed in your some 9 hours with him that non-work at that point had become preoccupied with some type of good and evil?
Yeah, she was evil for what she had done for him. He then started to incorporate the police into what I'm calling a delusional system. And so he'd be very attentive to news items about police brutality or police kind of thing. So now they were going to be the enemy that he would confront right after he killed her, that, okay, I'm going to meet the mortal enemy, the police, and that's because the police have now become part of the enemy forces, if you will. So he would kind of be pretty attentive to news items about things like Ferguson and police shootings and police corruption and stuff like that.
He was following him on the internet, was he not, Doctor, and printing articles and so on and so forth about those injustices in his mind?
Yes.
And why was it? I mean, he was in the Coast Guard, the military. He had no problem earlier in his life with law enforcement.
No, but the Coast Guard, with all due respect, is military light. They don't go out shooting people or dropping bombs or things of that sort. They are kind of rescue and help people and think Houston and things of that sort. But he had no problem with being suspicious of police. This was not a long-term kind of preoccupation. Some people have always been a little suspicious of the cops and things of that sort. No, he was a kind of straight arrow type person.
And did this fit into the operation, pushing law enforcement under this veil of now an evil force?
Correct,
The evil force that was going to take him out?
correct. But he was going to be engaged in mortal combat, him against an army of police officers, but he was going to go down with his guns blazing.
Well, having read the reports, you know that there were a certain number of these hoax devices, do you not, Doctor?
Yes,
So none of them were active to kill more members of law enforcement.
well, there were fake bombs, but he had a weapon, and he had bullets and the like, and, you know, so it was, the diversionary kinds of stuff were fake bombs and things with wires coming out of them, were diversionary, but he was armed, he clearly was armed and committed this terrible, tragic act with a gun. So he was armed, and if, as he expected, the cops were waiting outside of 11 Roundhouse or whatever, he would be firing at them, and he would expect that they would have superior force, and that would be it, he would be dead.
Why was it so important, Doctor, for him to document completely, with all the details, this operation?
Because it's part of his illness. There will be no misunderstanding about why I did this, okay? I'm going to write it all out for you. I'm going to do videos of it. I'm going to strap a GoPro camera to myself. There will be no doubt about what I am doing. The question is why, but he was not going to allow any ambiguity like with the Lisa situation in Kodiak and that whole situation. Here it is, and he says it into like the recording in Pennsylvania when he pulls off the side of the road, and he has already gone out and he scouted the situation, and he now says, oh, okay, I found that they do in fact live there. Now he can kind of see, and he panics because at some point he also has a sense that this is going on. The fact that he thinks that, can I go through with this? Doesn't mean that he can stop it, but he says right into the thing, I'm doing this so there'll be no misunderstanding. This recording will be available to the people after I'm dead, okay? And he's got thumb drives, and he's got stuff all over the place. He's got his manifesto. He's got everything. There will be no doubt.
Just if I can just slow you down, we recently had the opportunity to watch that Pennsylvania video, Doctor, and what he or some others may have interpreted to be some type of anxiety slash panic attack with this actual physical manifestations going on. Is that fair?
Yes,
And you know the word malingerer, don't you?
yes.
What's that word suggest?
It means that someone is making stuff up.
Or faking.
Faking, yes.
Was he doing that?
No, not in my opinion.
Well, again, a lot of this is things we're interpreting from somebody highly functioning Fair? This was now a actual physical manifestation when you see the gripping of the hand or inability to drive further.
Correct.
Can you help explain that to us and how that fits into your diagnosis?
You use the term panic attack or anxiety attack. This is not the typical anxiety attack that someone might have if they are in a grocery store and they're feeling anxious and I got to get home. This is not the person who suddenly, for no apparent reason, no reality base, no trigger, starts to feel lightheaded, and maybe they feel some chest pain, and maybe they feel short of breath, and they wonder if they're having a heart attack. That's the more day-to-day, if you will, neurotic kind of panic attack, anxiety, agoraphobia. This is much more primitive than that. He is kind of hyperventilating, but it's out of his control. He thinks it's going to be a heart attack. Maybe I'll die here. Wouldn't that be ironic in the field, in Pennsylvania or wherever it was? And he had had those before. In fact, in Kodiak, he had had, I think, 2 instances, one of which he went to the base military medical facility and then the hospital, and then another one like that. And he's had that, but this was the most profound, and it was documented. That it was important for him to document it. So you see him, he's pulling off to the side of the road, but he's got the camera looking up at his face. And then when he goes through the woods and into the open field, he's saying, I'm documenting this, so.
We understand now why he's documenting, but what's causing that in his psyche to take over his actual body, doctor?
Well, it's such a profound feeling. There is part of him, his core personality is quiet, gentle, non-aggressive. So the notion of taking another person's life actually is kind of foreign to him in his core personality, okay? Can he watch Star Wars and video games and there's killing all over the place and stuff like that and kind of enjoys it and the struggle between good and evil? He's into that in the video games, but in his day-to-day life in the world, he's quiet-ish, he's gentle, he doesn't get into fights, he's not aggressive, and can't do harmful things to people when he is not in my opinion, this delusional state, this tragic hero who is going to right a monstrous injustice and is going to be killed in the process.
So this wasn't an act of rage on his part, what ultimately culminated in February 5th of 2015?
I mean, the act, and I understand that the jury might have seen the video of the basically 10 minutes in the room. It plays out in a certain kinds of way. I've heard his description and also read Anna's description of that. But it plays out in a particular way. But he doesn't just come in and kill her. In fact, face to face, when he's right there and you can see in that video, he's really close to her. And his plan was to stab her in the heart, not fire anything, because other people in the building might be hurt, and it would be wrong to harm other people in the building, okay? So he's going to kill her by stabbing her. But when she's pleading with him, no, lawyer, no, I'm sorry, I was drunk, whatever she was saying, he couldn't bring himself to do it face to face, because that's not his personality.
Let me just jump back before we get there, please, because you gave us a lot there, but you talked about the elements of video games, doctor, and he had that going on when these operations? Is that fair?
The struggle between good and evil is all through all video games, and particularly Star Wars. Star Wars is different than a video game because there are people. Okay, there are actors playing people, but unlike kind of a cartoonish video game, these people are good people or evil people, or sometimes I'm not sure, but they are human characters portrayed by actors, okay? Many video games are not people, they are cartoonish and things of that sort. But most of that stuff is about the clash between good and evil.
But he was engaging in activities furtherance of some kind of delusional idea, was he not?
Correct. The delusional idea is this whole, I am going to be the tragic, heroic figure. I am going to be like a character in one of these Star Wars-ish. I am going to be the hero, and I am going to die in the process of correcting a monstrous injustice, okay? And so it's that quality, if you will, that makes it delusional, plus all the incredible trappings of what he was wearing, how he had scoped it out, the fake bombs, all the elaborate planning. It's almost like he's Steven Spielberg in a funny kind of way. He's setting up this almost movie-like situation.
So that's not reality-based, you'd say, Dr.
Well,
Nate?
it did happen, so it's reality-based in that sense. But what is it that is driving this system? What is making it happen? It's reality-based. Lisa is dead. She has been shot. He has set up all of things. There is reality to it, but why is it happening? And the why is that he has now come to sincerely believe that what he's doing is righting a monstrous injustice. And he's setting an example. He wants the Coast Guard to know, you screwed up, so something like this never happens again. You, the Coast Guard, will deal with the situation. And Lisa, who was the source of this whole scenario, you will pay for your monstrous injustice.
Significance, Doctor, if you would, of time of this event on his birthday?
Well, it's typical of the tidy orderliness of people with this condition. It's not going to be on his birthday, but all the loose ends have been taken care of. And if you just think of the totality of all the little loose ends that he took care of, he had satisfied his entire obligation to the Coast Guard. His enlistment was technically up in March, but he had accumulated enough leave that he never needed to show up there again. So he didn't owe the Coast Guard anything, okay? That little end nicely taken care of. His birthday, perfect time. I'm going to end on my birthday. I don't owe the Coast Guard anything. I don't want to be bothered by people calling me or trying to contact me around my birthday. So he calls his mother, his father, Jake, and says, in effect, I'm fine, everything's good, nothing much going on. Don't call me on my birthday. Don't try to get in touch with me. So he's taking care, and he takes care of loose ends. I mean, he took X-Lax the night before the event because he didn't want the people dealing with his bullet-ridden body to have to deal with the fact that when you're shot, you might lose control over your bowels. So it's, again, that kind of tidy little, but it's consistent with the mindset that he has. And this is beyond kind of just being an orderly, tidy person. This is driven by his wiring of his brain, in my opinion.
Gave away all of his personal possessions that meant the most to him, Doctor?
Yes. Except for a few action figures, which he set up in his apartment. He was going to be dead, so he knew that the police would be coming to his apartment. So he, kind of the last laugh on them, he greased the knobs of his apartment building. He put slippery stuff on the floor, apparently. He had action figures, life-size action figures, ready to go when they would come in. And on his desk, he had the page 7 right there. So he was thinking, when I'm dead, they're going to come in and it's not quite the last laugh, but you'll know that I set this up a particular way, and I want to direct you to the page 7 kind of stuff. And they, apparently they sent a robot in, and the action figures ended up on the floor, but they found the rest of the stuff. But
Well,
that
the
was
action-
his,
He actually brought an action figure that
yeah,
life-size cut out
yeah.
to Bourne, Massachusetts. Doctor, and you mentioned in your
Are you
report,
testifying, Mr. Segadelli, or are you going to ask a question about that action figure in Bourne?
did he bring an action figure to his hotel room in Bourne, Doctor?
I don't know.
Okay. Now,
It's never the question of the lawyer, jurors, that is part of the evidence. It's only the answer of the witness. Counsel aren't here to testify. And with that, enjoy your lunch, please. Please be in your jury room, ready to go at 2 o'clock. I'll bring you right down and put you to work. Thank you.
All rise, please.